Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a brand new deck tech for you, but before that, just a quick reminder to please click like and subscribe if you enjoy my videos. We're well on our way to 1 million subscribers and every single click counts. And today's deck tech is going to be centered around Calamity, Galloping Inferno. For 4 colors and 2 red, it's a legendary creature horse mount, 4/6 with haste. Whenever Calamity, Galloping Inferno attacks while saddled, choose a non-legendary creature that's saddled it this turn, and create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of it. Sacrifice that token at the beginning of the next end step, repeat this process once, and saddle 1. So this is one of the highest value red commanders we've seen in a long time. I've seen a lot of people have very negative opinions on this, but I actually really like it and think it's very solid. So the plan we're going to be going for in this deck is including a lot of creatures with enter the battlefield and death triggers so that we can get a lot of value off of the trigger from Calamity. We have a couple of ways to get extra triggers and to double the triggers off our commander. And do bear in mind that this is a budget deck. You can definitely make this deck a lot stronger, but I do think it's quite strong at the moment for a budget of only under $50. So you can definitely get a competent deck out of this, and it should be very fun to play. And without further ado, let's get started. And we're starting off with Ardent Elementalist. This is a very powerful one to double up with Calamity, Galloping Inferno. We don't have that many instants or sorceries, but we should have enough that we can always target 1 or 2 of them with this. Aspiring Champion is a really cool one. It does actually need to deal combat damage, but that's actually fine. It has menace, so it isn't completely unreasonable to expect this to deal combat damage. When it does, we basically get to sack it and keep flipping until we put another creature onto the battlefield from our deck, which is a really fun ability. Cavalier of Flame is a really solid card in this deck. Once we start getting multiple copies of it with our commander, we can then dump a bunch of cards into the graveyard, hopefully quite a few lands as well. And then when the token copies that we've made die, they're going to deal a bunch of damage to each opponent. Charming Scoundrel is an excellent value piece in red deck, and it just works very well with what the deck is trying to do. Giving us treasures is also kind of important in this deck because if our commander dies, we want to be able to recast it. Circuit Mender is great. It's going to gain us a little bit of life when it comes in and draw us a card when it leaves. Bone Shell can be a really fun one. There is some potential to miss with this, so do keep that in mind. But if you don't miss, it can be a super fun card to make multiple copies of. Combustible Gearhook is a card that I've always really liked. It's very good in this deck because we have a fairly high mana curve, and once we start getting copies of it with our commander, it can make things very difficult for our opponents. Starfleet Daredevil is basically like Snapcaster Mage, but for cards in our opponent's graveyard. That's really sweet. Duplicant is excellent creature removal on a stick that we can copy with our commander. Fanatic of Mogus is going to be one of the best finishers in the deck. We can play it, then immediately get 2 copies of it with our commander, and that's basically going to give us 3 triggers of that ability in 1 turn, which should often be enough to finish the game. Felden of the Third Path is a great way to reuse creatures that have hit the graveyard in this deck. Filigree Familiar is very similar to Circuit Mender and can just boost our life a little bit and draw some cards. Goblin Chain Whirler is a card that I've always been very impressed with in Commander. It can be very good against token decks and keep them in check very nicely, but in this deck we can get 3 copies of it in 1 turn, which obviously means we can wipe a lot of boards. Warding Dragon can allow us to search up an artifact, and it's going to put it immediately into our hand if we get token copies of it with our commander. Jax is the Troublemaker, just like Felden, works very nicely with what this deck is trying to do. We have a lot of good ETBs and death triggers, so this is just going to fit in very nicely. Mark of Enforcer may not look like much, but hear me out. It's actually very solid when we're making token copies of it with our commander, because of course the token copies are also vampires, so they're each going to see all the other ones, and basically you're going to get a bunch of triggers and should be able to wipe a lot of boards with this. Meteor Golem is one of the best ways that red has to deal with any sort of permanent. Mindclaw Shaman is a card that I've always found really fun, and in this deck we're going to get a lot of copies of it, which is really nice. The cool thing is, after we play the first one, we know if we want to target the same opponent with the copies because we'll know if they have instants or sorceries in hand. Molten Primordial is an excellent finisher in this deck. We can play it, take control of 3 things, tap it to saddle our commander, get 2 extra copies that all have haste, and steal another 3 things. This is just going to end the game in a hurry. Patron of the Arts is excellent with our commander because it gives us a treasure when it comes in and when it leaves. Plundering Barbarian is some nice artifact removal that can also ramp into our commander and provide some value if there's no good artifacts to kill. Port Razor is one of the best ways to finish off the game. We can saddle our commander with it to get 2 token copies of it that are attacking, and as long as just one of them can connect, we basically go infinite because our commander is going to untap, it's going to attack again, we're going to get another 2 token copies and rinse and repeat. Rapacious Dragon immediately gives us 2 treasures when it ETBs, which is great. Red Dragon is another great way to finish off the game. With our commander out and having saddled it with Red Dragon, we can deal 36 damage to our opponent's faces the turn we play this. Rose Room Treasurer is going to work well with all the creatures we're creating, and the final ability should actually be relevant in this deck because we're going to be making a lot of treasures and having a lot of mana. Ruin Grinder is great because we can cycle it to get a mountain if we need to early, but then later on in the game we can just keep recycling our hand, which is great. Scampering Surveyor and Solemn Simulacrum are excellent in this deck because they both help to ramp into our commander on turn 5. They curve very nicely, and Solemn is obviously a little bit better because it has the death trigger, but Scampering Surveyor is still very good. Spawn of Thraxus is obviously insane and is one of the best ways to finish the game in this deck. Stalking Vengeance is yet another great finisher, which is going to trigger a lot when our creatures die. Trumpeting Carnosaur is amazing value, and early on in the game we can use it as removal, which is very nice. Wily Goblin just gives us another treasure and kind of helps round out our curve, and Zealous Conscripts can be a great way to try to finish off the game if there aren't too many creatures on the board. Moving on to instants, we have Bolt Bend to help protect our commander, which is going to be very important in this deck. Demand Answers works very nicely because we're running a lot of artifacts and a lot of treasure tokens. Great Train Heist should be very easy to cast, and since our commander is going to trigger upon attacking, this works so nicely and can provide so much damage out of nowhere. Thibault's Trickery is one of the most expensive cards in the deck, but it is great to be able to interact on the stack with our opponents. And Will's Reversal is yet another way to interact with our opponent's removal spells on our commander. For artifacts, I wanted to highlight Hazoret's Monument. This is going to be very good in the deck. It's going to allow us to filter out cards we don't need from our hand, and it's going to make all of our creatures cheaper. Idol of Oblivion is going to be a great way for us to draw some cards, since we're making a bunch of treasures and our commander is making tokens. Panharmonicon is going to work really well in this deck. We have a bunch of triggers from our creatures and our commander, so this is just going to work very nicely. Moving on to enchantments, we have Goblin Bombardment. This can be a nice way to reuse all of those token copies that are going to die anyway to get some value out of them. Industrial Advancement has always been one of my favorite cards, and it's so good in this deck. We have a lot of high value creatures that we make token copies of that we don't mind sacrificing. Vicious Shadows can finish the game so quickly out of nowhere. Nobody really sees it coming, and it just deals so much damage. And Warstorm Surge can be a great way to either control the board or just finish off the game when we start making token copies of big creatures. Finally, for lands, we have Castle Embereth, which is going to work very nicely by pumping our creatures. Diamond City is really good with our commander because we can move a shield counter onto it basically at any time after we've attacked with it, since we're going to get 2 token copies, which sacrifices the requirement, and we don't need to do it at sorcery speed, so we can wait to see if it's going to be killed during combat and then tap it to put the shield counter on it. Rogue's Passage is a great way to make sure our commander doesn't die in combat, which is always nice, and War Room and Bonder's Enclave give us a good way to dump our mana into drawing some extra cards. So there you have it. That has been my Calamity Galloping Inferno deck tech. What do you think about this one? Are you as excited as I am to get your hands on this? I do love the mono red commander, and it's been quite a few years since I've had one of these, so I might actually have to throw this together. But what do you think? Are there any cards you think I missed? Any cards you think I shouldn't have included? Do you love mono red as much as I do? Let me know in the comment section below. I always make sure to read all of your comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. It really helps the channel. And until next time, take care.